Welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cyber criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello and welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast. This is your co-host, Zach Fuller, joined by Mike Rotondo and Lauro Chavez. And today we are talking about the remote workforce and how that affects compliance and all kinds of great stuff around that people are concerned about and asking about. But before we do, Mike, why don't you dive in with the news?
Good morning and welcome to the news. FBI warns of malicious QR codes used to steal your money. The FBI warned Americans this week that cybercriminals are using maliciously crafted QR codes to steal their credentials and financial info. The warning was issued as a public service announcement. That was nice of them. Think about that twice when you're at the bar, hitting the QR code to pull up the menu. You never know what's really there. Malicious PowerPoint files used to push remote access Trojans. Since December 2021, a growing trend in phishing campaigns has emerged that uses malicious PowerPoint documents to distribute various types of malware, including remote access and information stealing Trojans, according to a report by Netscope. The actors are using PowerPoint files combined with legitimate cloud services that host the malware payloads. The families deployed in the track campaign are Warzone, aka Ave Maria, and Agent Tesla. They're both rats, so keep that in mind. There's two Android stories today. Latest version of Android, Rat Brata, wipes devices after stealing data, and 105 million Android users targeted by subscription fraud campaign. The new version of Brata Android malware supports new features, including GPS tracking and functionality to perform a factory reset on the device. So I guess is not a bug, not a feature, but more of a bug. The rat was delivered through the official Google Play Store and also via unofficial Android app stores. So be careful. It's labeled as CVE 2019-3568. Two Mac issues today. Hackers infect Mac OS with new Dazzle Spy backdoor and watering hole attacks. And Apple fixes two zero-day security bugs, one exploited in the wild. Two bugs that were fixed were for iOS 15.3 and iPadOS 15.3. There's a Safari browser flaw that could have spilled users' browsing data, plus a zero-day I/O mobile frame buffer bug exploited in the wild. Apple on Wednesday released 13 patches for serious security bugs in Mac OS and 10 for flaws in iOS and iPadOS. They include fixes for two zero-day bugs, one of which may have been exploited by attackers in the wild. Moving on to software we thought was safe, PwnKit. Local privilege escalation bug affects major Linux distros. Tracked as CVE 2021-4034. Affects all major Linux distributions to gain full root privileges on the system. The good news is that this issue is not remotely exploitable, but if the attacker can log in as any unprivileged user, it can be allowed to gain root privileges. And then attackers connect rogue devices to organizations' network with stolen O365 credentials. Attackers are trying out a new technique to widen the reach of their phishing campaigns by using stolen O365 credentials. They try to connect rogue Windows devices to the victim's organization's Azure AD. If successful, they are ready to launch a second wave of campaign, which consists of sending more phishing emails to targets outside the organization as well as within. So a lot of scary stuff out there. There's a couple additional headlines that we've got. COVID test-related scam emails still highly popular. 53% of all medical devices have a known critical vulnerability, and attackers are now actively targeting critical sonic wall RCE bugs. So if you got a sonic wall, check that out. Laura, how are we doing?
Thanks, Mike. Well, to follow up a little bit on your Apple zero-day stuff, I think the Apple Safari bug, upgrade to 15.2, that you'll squash that. And really what it allows is if you go by a malicious website and you've got a bunch of tabs open, so say you've got Safari open with, your bank and Facebook and, whatever, right? And you go to this maliciously crafted site, they can glean information from the other tabs. So that's patched, as you said, Mike, in that bug. And then just to poke fun at the Linux bug that you were talking about, that's a 12-year-old vulnerability. That's what I think is the best part, is that particular policy kit that causes this root level vulnerability has been around for 12 years. So yeah, take a look at that on your Linux distros, because that affects every version of open source Linux. So if you're on Red Hat or CentOS or Debian, all of those are going to be impacted. So make sure you patch that. The one flaw I want to talk about from an exploitable is if you're using Oracle WebLogic Server 14, there is a local file inclusion, exploit code, payload available. So if you've got Oracle WebLogic Server, make sure that you're taking a look at that and patching it, because local files can be gleaned with that local file inclusion exploit that's available. And yeah, stay safe out there. A lot of stuff going on. I'm surprised to see Apple in the news again, but it's not Microsoft, so it's not every week.
I think as our footprint enlarges across the world, people are going to start targeting more.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Often was believed to be bulletproof, right? Well, it's not bulletproof anymore. So,
nope, unfortunately not. Not if you plug it into the internet anyway. All right, Zach, what are we talking about today? Please tell me it's comic books this time.
Well, we can, but maybe not this conversation. We might have to hold that till later. But we haven't had any comic book requests lately as far as topic of conversation. But
I don't know why.
I hate to disappoint. But if there's something you want to share about comic books, by all means, jump in.
Yeah, Deadpool #1 is up about 400% in value. So if you've got a Deadpool New Mutants 98 first appearance, you're doing pretty good with your money right now. So all right.
One graded, one not.
Exactly. Oh, just keep hodling that, man, because those are going up real high in value. So no, but seriously, what are we really talking about today?
Well, this is shocking, but I don't have that particular issue in my vast collection of comic books. But that said, today we're talking about something that we hear fairly regularly, and so I want to address that. Spend a little bit of time on it today, and that is companies, usually mid-market or emerging-sized companies, asking about the complexities of becoming compliant to various requirements. Doesn't really matter, but ISO 27001, CMMC are two that we hear a lot about, but also SOC 2 and others. But the question is this: we have a remote distributed workforce, and we have these compliance requirements. How is that going to affect our compliance? What do we need to do? And what is the answer basically for compliance, and what type of effect does it really have, if any, on our compliance? So that's the question.
Want even more Cyber Rants? Be sure to subscribe to the Cyber Rants podcast. Get your copy of our best-selling book, Cyber Rants, on Amazon today. This podcast is brought to you by Silent Sector, the firm dedicated to building world-class cybersecurity programs for mid-market and emerging companies across the U.S. Silent Sector also provides industry-leading penetration tests and cyber risk assessments. Visit silentsector.com and contact us today.
Do you have any brilliant answers or ways you'd like to kick off that discussion?
Secure the world. I'm just kidding, but yeah, no. To echo what you said, Zach, we do get this question a lot, and we're working with clients that have this issue happening right now. It's even worse if you're allowing your remote workforce to use their own devices, right? Versus bring your own devices. Really, they're using their home desktop or laptop that their kids play Steam games on. So makes it a very interesting problem to solve. But I think essentially, it doesn't matter that, if you're issuing devices or you're allowing users to, use their computers at home to connect, to the Office 365 or, whatever environment. Unfortunately, you're still required to ensure compliance and security over those devices. And so the problem becomes really, how do we do that effectively? Would you agree, Mike? I mean, you think obviously like all those devices are still part of your computer domain and your computer asset inventory. And so I don't see any way to get around it just because you're working at home or, that sort of thing. I think all those devices are still fall under the guise of the compliance frameworks, no matter what. So I think the question really is
all of those things are in scope.
Yeah, all of it's in scope. So it makes it difficult, right? And I think probably just to lay some problem solving out there is that those remote workstations need to, be guaranteed of their operating integrity, right? So meaning that there still has to be a secure configuration applied to that remote device. Okay, whether you're doing it by local policy, group policy, or using like a third-party tool to enforce security using the local security policy. but they still have to remain, in some form of a secured configuration. They still have to have anti-malware programs on them. They still have to have some form of a whitelisting so that you're not allowing, your home users to, play Steam games, right, while they're supposed to be in a meeting on your work computer. So I think the most difficult part that we see for organizations is, especially if they don't have Active Directory, and they're not using, like kind of roaming profiles, if you will. How do you secure that without having to do like this VPN tunnel back to the, to the organization's, kind of enterprise network? And that's certainly one way to solve the problem. You can install a VPN technology so that the device connects to the VPN, connects to your corporate network. And then from there, you can enforce lots of things through your gateway, like not playing Steam games, which I know Mike loves to do while we're working. The other problem is making sure that, that the users are not leaving their, again, all the controls apply. So if you're at home and you get up and you walk away to go, get some coffee or go to make lunch, and you've got a crazy 2.5-year-old like I do, and she sees that, daddy's got up from his workstation, I'm going to go play dad for a minute, and she gets on there, she starts clicking buttons, you've got a problem. So you still have to make sure that remote workstation's locking it according to policy, right? If that's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but you're enforcing that session lockout to prevent your son's friends or your daughter's friends from coming over and seeing work data on the laptop. So again, the same controls apply regardless if you're at the enterprise work site, at the office, or you're allowing those users to remote work from their homes or coffee shop locations or the comic book store, which is one of my favorite places to work.
So what you have to design is you have to design the remote networking policy, and you have to augment your acceptable usage policy to take these things into account. You have to design a home office policy so the expectations are properly set for your users, so they understand. The other thing is that you really, really shouldn't be allowing people to use their own computers, especially if you're dealing with regulated data. So you may be better off investing in some laptops you can configure and manage, or desktops, which are less expensive, however you want to manage that. Now, the additional thing to control where they're going on the browsers and that sort of thing is to implement a SASE solution if you have the budget to do so, which will just basically limit what their web browsers can do. So on your computer, right? There's a lot of options out there, but it's just walking that fine line. I fought that battle with a couple of clients. It's like, no, they have to lock the computer, and they're like, well, they usually leave them on it for months on end, and it's like, no, you can't do that. Well, what if we push a patch? Well, then let them know you're going to push a patch and turn the computer on. So that is the new world right now. And unfortunately, cyber criminals are attacking those remote logins and VPN connections and concentrators, and have found a ton of flaws, because for a long time, they really weren't, I won't say they weren't primary targets, but they kind of weren't. We've seen it escalate over since 2020, since the pandemic started, that a lot of cyber criminal activity is targeted at those type of tools. So
yeah, absolutely. And here's, I'll just run through the attack scenario for you, right? A lot of your home networks are using either a local telecom supply device, right? So if you're in, Cox Telecom or whatever your local telecom is, and you've got fiber or you've got, cable, whatever, they're going to give you a small device. Okay, that device typically is a 2-in-1, right? So it's doing your gateway routing, and it's got wireless typically on it as well, right? So it's enabling wireless from the home. So now a lot of these devices aren't patched, or even if you go out and you buy yourself a Netgear cable router, okay, if you get on Shodan, you'll find very quickly that there are a lot of home networking gear that are vulnerable to default password attacks. So, that device that your telco provides you to give you internet service, they just leave the default password right in it. It's up to you to log into that device and change that default password. The same as if you you go to Best Buy or on Amazon and you order yourself a D-Link or Highway, whatever, home device. You've got to change those defaults, because Shodan and the cyber criminals are getting that indexed, and they can just log right into that device and have access to your home equipment, right? Whether that's the iPads that the kids are using. We've seen issues where we've had cameras, internal monitoring cameras for like the kids' playroom, being hijacked and attackers, screaming obscenities to the kids, through their own camera at the house. And that can lead certainly to attack to the corporate computer, or the computer that's being used for corporate activities. So if you're providing that, it's a little easier to control the security on the device itself, right? Especially if you've got VPN capabilities where now you're tunneled through that default, routing device back to the company's infrastructure, protecting you from, essentially the attacker coming in and seeing that. But we've seen a lot, like you said, Mike, it's not preferred. Certainly we frown on it highly for organizations to allow, their remote users to use their personal computers, even if it's just for Office 365. Oh, we have Office 365. You can just get to it from a browser. That doesn't stop them from downloading documents onto their home computer. That doesn't stop them from, visiting malicious pages that, just like we saw today with the Apple Safari. Okay, Chrome's had similar problems with parallel frames in the, parallel tabbing, essentially, right, where you can hijack the tab and then you can see what other information's happening in the parallel tabs that are functioning. So if they've got Office 365 open, they're going to glean that data. If you've got your banking site open, they're going to probably be able to glean that data. Now it's more of a drive-by attack, meaning, maybe you're visiting a weird news site and they've got an ad running that, pops this exploit. That's where the problem is. And then the other issue is we see is that when users are allowed to use their own home computing devices, there should be some form of, like you said, Mike, some remote use policy that states that you can use your personal computer if we can install the Cisco VPN and we can install whatever antivirus program is being used, right, for the corporate onto those devices to try to ensure some level of protection. And what we've seen is that, some of the home users don't want to do that, right? They don't want to pollute their home personal computer with the corporate enterprise security tools. So now you've got this whole other conundrum, right, on how do we secure this? And there's always a good excuse. Well, the developer needs, the home machine that the developer has is more powerful than the corporate machine I gave him. And so they're going to use their home personal computer because it's got more horsepower than the one we delivered. Well, I think that comes to, sizing the right computing space for the individuals and what they need to do their jobs too.
Yeah, I mean, so going back to the router situation, we've gone through this exercise where we actually had the help desk or the MSP or whoever was actually interfacing with the end users go through and do an audit of your routers and see what they were, how recent they were, and basically made it, if you've got a router that's 9-year-old, Netgear that hasn't been patched and is out of service and you can't use it for work anymore. You got to go buy one. You got to upgrade because it's just not safe. We asked about passwords. We actually got 100% compliant with a couple customers that the users actually responded. But going back to the default password, I can tell you there are Cox routers out there. I know from personal experience of people I know that you can't change the password on because they come and they're, Cox is like, we'll manage that for you. Not to bag on Cox, but that's not acceptable. Or I guess maybe it's better than leaving your phone number there, but you really need to be able to secure those devices. So maybe you need to set them up as a pass-through and then provide an additional router or something of that nature. But when it comes to compliance, you still have to be consider things like the requirements of PCI, the requirements of HIPAA, the requirements of those things, of other regulated data issues, where you have to still maintain that security even at home. You still have to maintain that privacy and protection even at home. And I just don't think allowing end users in a regulated environment to use their home computer is a good idea, even if it's a SaaS they're accessing or whatever. And I was going back to Office 365. I think OneDrive should be shut off from end users' home computers. I don't think they should be allowed to access it. And corporate mail needs to go through, and there are controls in O365 that do allow you to regulate who can and what download data and from where. And I think those need to be implemented. Don't just go buy the cheapest O365 license, buy the secure one. So that's my
I like your soapbox. And using live docs is it's a great feature, right? Whether you're Google or Office 365, you can share those docs and you can edit them right in the cloud, which is really cool. A lot of users don't do that. They want to pull down a local copy. And that's where you have the problem, right? And like you said, Mike, if you're dealing with NIST, it's CY or PCI, right? The PCI, tier 1 and tier 2 data types, that becomes a problem. And if people are installing the Microsoft Office suite of products locally, right, the apps locally, now you've got your OneDrive that can, like app like iCloud, right, is going to mirror that data back and forth. So now you've got a local copy of it in some cases. So you need to make sure that those types of activities are locked down, especially if the employee is not using a device that has been purchased and configured by your organization. And if you want to be terrified, just simply get on Shodan.io and do a search for like Netgear, and you'll be shocked at how many hundreds of thousands of devices come up that are vulnerable to literally like default password attacks. You can log right into these devices. No one is securing them, and there's just a ton of them sitting right here in the United States.
Okay, and this is kind of an aside, but this is my own personal complaint. The last 3 Netgear routers I have bought have not worked, and I've had to return them, every one of them. So I am done with Netgear forever and ever. Amen. I don't know what's wrong with it, but yeah, the last 3 will not work.
We're going to put those in the category with Microsoft and
yeah.
They're all buddy. They're all like sister companies. They all hang out together.
They do. Is WordPress making Netgear routers now? Is that what's happening?
You never know.
That's the firmware. They all the Microsoft Netgear and people they must go to the same bar and exchange notes or something like that. But well, that's there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot we could talk about in addition to just the different threats and risks. But I think the big hurdle that organizations, unfortunately, and I know it can be a lot to bite off, but unfortunately have to get over, is the fact that issuing devices is the way to go. I mean, unfortunately, you can't really sugarcoat it. You can't really, there's not really an easy way out. It's just a matter of, hey, do you want to be compliant? Do you want to be secure? How seriously are you taking that and issuing those devices and having centralized management of them? So Active Directory or Jump Cloud or something like that. Without that, life is going to be, I would argue, a lot more difficult for you. So might as well just say, hey, this is a cost of doing business with a remote workforce. And even if they're in the office, right, you still need to issue them a device. So I think that's just a cost that these organizations will need to face and get on it, make it happen.
I think what has to happen is that if your CFO is holding up the expenditure, that you pay some hacker to hack the CFO so he can feel a bunch of pain, and then they'll be like, "Oh, I totally get the need for having to have the security." That's my
fear mongering. I like it. Don't come to us. We won't do that. But
I think that's from the mafia.
So the last one of my, I guess, one last soapbox piece I'll get on is the admin rights, right? That's the biggest thing in a lot of these frameworks. Users cannot have admin rights full time on their their employee devices. And the same's going to bleed over if you're letting them use a personal device at home.
Right.
That there's not an assessor in this planet that with at least that doesn't look crooked, and as when you look him in the eyes and he's cross-eyed, then he might. But aside from that one individual, everybody else is gonna slap the hand and fail your audit because all of your remote workforce has administrative privileges all the time. Unfortunately, that way of doing IT is antiquated. It's dangerous, and you're not ever going to pass a compliance framework. Not one of them making everybody an admin at all times. They have to use multiple accounts. They can elevate their access if you have a process for that, but that's probably one of the biggest issues with using your personal device is all these users are going to be admins. So even if you tell them to install the VPN software and the malware software, they can disable it if it makes them mad. They're like, well, my internet's not working right, so it's got to be my antivirus program. I'm going to turn it off. That's when you get into the problem, and that's when something will happen, and that's when you'll get data leakage happening, right? So you've got to enforce that security control at the user level. Remember that most of the malware that interacts is going to interact with the shell of the user. So if the user's operating, not all the time, right? There's some privileged processes that are still going to run that malware and ratware can take advantage of. But 90% of the time, if the user gets drive-by malware, it's going to interact with the operating system at the level of privileges the user has in their active shell at that moment. So if they're running a user level privileged shell, you're going to be able to reduce the damage versus if you're running in an admin shell, right? Now they're going to have access to all kinds of things at that user level, right? So make sure that, of all things, make sure that you're focusing on the permissions that the user has, and that's really where it starts, right? If they're using a home machine, they're going to have admin privileges. It's going to cause you problems. If you're providing that device, you can control that level of access a lot more granular than just hoping that the user does the right thing. Unfortunately, we can't rely on that to provide the integrity.
That's actually one of the questions in the SOC 2 audit is, do your users have the ability to turn off antivirus? And if you answer yes to that, you got to either remediate or fail, right? So depending on the auditor.
Yeah, so, I mean, because it's an easy way to undermine your whole security. I mean, you could spend millions of dollars on security, and if one user has admin access, they can turn all those millions of dollars worth of security tools right off, and then cause havoc to happen.
Well, I mean, look at Colonial Pipeline, right? The reason they got hacked is because there was a user with a VPN account that had been terminated, but the account had not been removed. It's simple hygiene stuff that you always get bit on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these attackers, a lot of them are looking for, the easy way in, right? And so, like we always say, like Zach always says, be a hard target. A lot of these cyber criminals are like a car thief walking along a row of cars in the Bronx at night, right? They're going to lift car handles. And they're not going to try to smash windows because they know eventually someone left their car unlocked. They're just going to lift the handle and get right in.
Well, it used to be, I'm dating myself, but back in the good old days, you used to brute force through a firewall, right? You used to attack. There used to be a way to create you used to break through that way, right? Through the front door. You'd find some kind of weakness in the, external perimeter. That still happens occasionally, but primarily now it's always a sideways. There's an attack vector sideways because, firewalls have gotten so sophisticated, although we've seen a rash of issues lately, that, a frontal assault is not necessarily going to work. I mean, if you want to take a war analogy, it's, the trench warfare of World War I was, the early 2000s and late 90s. And now we're more sophisticated, like the asymmetrical warfare that we've been doing in Afghanistan and Iraq and that sort of thing. So,
yeah, you can't forge your IP anymore to try to get a firewall to let you in. Unfortunately, like with the AI that's happening, that's just not a viable attack vector anymore. Yeah. So that's why you're seeing this sideways, right? The crab walk of using trusted software and using drive-by zero-day attacks, like what we're seeing with the Apple stuff that you brought forward today. And that's kicking in the front door is a hacker, a tactic of an antiquated age. Not to age us both, and for those, I always talk about Mike being old as dirt and dinosaur, but he's only got like 6 or 7 years on me. So just remember that, when I'm talking crap about Mike's age, I'm talking crap about me too, because we've been in IT about the same amount of time, minus a few years. So I apologize.
For those of you complaining about how hard IT was, imagine what it was like in Laura and my days when you didn't have half of the tools or a third of the tools or a quarter of the tools that you have today, when you had to build a server from DOS on up and you didn't have VMs or images,
or Kubernetes or Docker. I got 2 words for anybody out there. And if you know these, then you are a master race, old school IT nerd. 2 words for you: Banyan Vines.
Oh God. Yeah.
I'm picturing you two sitting in rocking chairs on the porch right now, having this conversation, sipping your tea.
with an abacus.
Back in my day, it was so hard. These kids, they don't know how easy they have it.
They point, click, next, finish. They have no idea how to compile a DOS program.
I remember buying Brook Trout modems, and you'd have banks of modems that these Brook Trout boards had, and you'd be connecting 5 or 6 phone cables into the back of these things so you could run internet or dial in to get to what was the internet at the time. So
yeah, company owned devices wasn't such a issue then, right? When you had to go take the punch cards into the warehouse.
Hey
right?
now, that's a low blow.
It was hard to spread malware through an abacus, but
yeah. God, try to run out with the roll of punch cards, and you slip and fall in the puddle of water and ruin all the data.
Oh, those days were terrible, let me tell you.
Well, I remember. So this is going when I was a kid. My father used to work for a company that had a what's called robo management of inventory. It was a picking system, and that managed all their inventory, and there were all these robots running throughout the factory where they delivered stuff to the appropriate place and inventory and was picked out of the factory. Well, I went in there one day and he set me in the server room just so I could see what it was. He had these massive banks of machines. And I was maybe 9, 10, 11, something like that. Anyway, I went back in when I was 18 because I had to work at the factory for a summer just so I could understand why I had to go to college. And that whole thing had been replaced by one 46 DX100. So,
gosh,
yeah.
Since we're on the porch rocking chair telling stories, I remember in the Army when they thought I was hacking when I was doing a net use with like a $F and then whack the share name, and they thought that was hacking. I was like, no, that's how the network's set up right now. So when you used to be able to use net use and open up a remote share like $C and be able to browse it, yeah, no, that was not hacking. That was just using a part of the system that no one else knew about. That's good. You changed the law.
Criminal. That's Article 15 right there.
They call you comrade?
No, believe it or not, like once I explained myself, I got solely rewarded, but it took a minute for them to understand what was going on. They were quite surprised. Back when the MCSE required you to take networking essentials, you know what I mean, as an elective.
Yeah. I remember that.
Back in the good old days.
On the porch, with a glass of whiskey. People were
honest, and life was simpler back then.
You could sign up with a handshake.
Computing was hard. Life was simple.
Well, times have changed, gentlemen. And with that, good talk today. I hope this information helps all those organizations out there, the millions and millions and millions that are listening, that help them understand why it's important to not take these things lightly when it comes to compliance and security. This is a different environment, and we need to make sure that we're securing ourselves properly. And part of that, I hate to say it, it requires you kind of pushing back on the users a little bit, saying, hey, this is how things are going to be. These are the devices we're going to use, and they have to like it. It's for their own good, because if the company goes down, guess what? So do their jobs, and then nobody's happy. So you're doing them a favor. That said, thank you for jumping on here, joining us today on the Cyber Rants podcast. Be sure that you rate the episode and subscribe to the channel, and let us know what your comments are, your topics for future episodes, all that good stuff, so that we can share the information that you are interested in that helps you in your journey. So thanks a lot, and have a great day.
Tell your friends about us. We're only 11 million behind Joe Rogan.
Catching up, though. Catching up.
We are catching up.
Watch out, Joe.
Pick up your copy of the Cyber Rants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the Cyber Rants podcast.